Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Marvin. Trust is a fragile thing that takes years to build and seconds to destroy. When the DNA test results came back showing I wasn't the father of the child I'd been preparing to raise as my own, I thought I knew everything about betrayal. But the message I received from an old friend weeks later revealed that the deception had been even deeper than I'd imagined, and that sometimes the people warning you about disasters are the same ones trying to prevent them. Stephanie and I had been together for 5 years when she told me she was pregnant. 5 years that had slowly evolved from casual dating into a serious partnership that felt ready for the next level. We'd moved in together 2 years earlier, combining our belongings and our lives in the kind of natural progression that happens when two people genuinely care about each other and want to build something lasting. Those 5 years had been good to us. Stephanie worked as a dental hygienist at a busy practice downtown, and I was an operations manager for a regional shipping company that handled logistics for businesses throughout the tri-state area. We both had stable careers that provided financial security without being so demanding that they consumed all of our time and energy. Our relationship had developed at a comfortable pace that felt right for both of us. We'd met at a friend's birthday party, discovered we had similar interests, and built our connection through shared experiences while gradually increasing emotional intimacy. Neither of us was in a rush to reach relationship milestones, preferring to let things develop naturally rather than forcing timelines or commitments we weren't ready for. Moving in together had been Stephanie's suggestion after we'd been dating for 3 years. She'd been renting a small apartment that was convenient to her work but expensive for what it offered. And I owned a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood that had more space than I needed for myself. The arrangement made financial sense for both of us, while also allowing us to take the next step in our relationship. The transition to living together had been smoother than either of us had expected. We'd been spending most nights together anyway, so combining our households was more about logistics than about adjusting to new relationship dynamics. Stephanie brought her furniture, her books, her collection of houseplants, and her cat Oliver, while I made space in my house for the life we were building together. Stephanie was a naturally nurturing person who seemed to enjoy creating a warm, comfortable home environment. She would cook elaborate meals on weekends, tend to her plants with the kind of dedication that turned our house into a green oasis, and host dinner parties that brought our friends together in ways that strengthened our social connections and sense of community. I appreciated her domestic skills and her ability to transform my bachelor pad into a real home, but what I valued most was her emotional support and partnership. She encouraged my professional goals, listened patiently to my work frustrations, and provided the kind of steady, reliable companionship that made every day better just because she was part of it. When Stephanie told me she was pregnant, my reaction was immediate and overwhelming joy. We had talked about having children someday, and while the pregnancy hadn't been planned, it felt like the natural next step in our relationship. I was excited about becoming a father and thrilled that we would be starting a family together. Stephanie seemed equally happy about the pregnancy, though she was also nervous about the changes it would bring to our lives and our relationship. She had always been a planner who liked to have control over her circumstances, and an unplanned pregnancy represented the kind of unpredictability that made her anxious even when she was excited about the outcome. I threw myself into the role of expectant father with enthusiasm and dedication. I read books about pregnancy and childbirth, attended doctor's appointments with Stephanie whenever possible, and began preparing our house for the arrival of our baby. I converted the spare bedroom into a nursery, researching cribs and car seats and all the equipment we would need to provide a safe, comfortable environment for our child. As Stephanie's pregnancy progressed and her due date approached, I became even more convinced that she was the woman I wanted to spend my life with and raise children with. Watching her handle the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy with grace and strength made me admire her even more and feel more confident about our future as a family. By her 7th month, I felt ready to make our commitment official and proposed to her with an engagement ring I had chosen carefully based on her preferences and style. Her acceptance was enthusiastic and emotional, and we immediately began planning a wedding that would take place shortly after our baby's birth. We decided to have a small, intimate ceremony that would be manageable even with a newborn, focusing on the legal and spiritual significance of marriage rather than an elaborate celebration that might be stressful to organize while adjusting to parenthood. The timing would allow us to become husband and wife while our child was still very young, creating the kind of stable family structure we both wanted. I took care of Stephanie throughout the entire pregnancy process, supporting her through morning sickness, helping with household tasks that became difficult as her mobility decreased, and providing emotional reassurance during moments when she felt overwhelmed by the changes happening to her body and our life together. The labor and delivery process was intense, but ultimately successful, with Stephanie giving birth to a healthy baby boy we named Christopher. Holding my son for the first time was one of the most powerful emotional experiences of my life, and I felt an immediate, overwhelming love for this tiny person who represented the future Stephanie and I were building together. During the routine medical tests that are performed on all newborns, I made a decision that would change everything between us. I asked the hospital staff to include a DNA test among the standard procedures, something I could do discreetly without Stephanie's knowledge or consent. I want to be clear that I had no specific reason to doubt that Christopher was my biological child. There were no obvious warning signs in Stephanie's behavior, no evidence of infidelity, and no circumstances that had raised red flags about her faithfulness during the pregnancy. My decision to request the DNA test was more about covering all bases and ensuring legal clarity than because I genuinely suspected deception. But when the results came back several days later, they revealed information that shattered my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Stephanie and the family we had just created. The test showed conclusively that I was not Christopher's biological father. The impact of this revelation was immediate and devastating. Not only had Stephanie been unfaithful at some point during our relationship, but she had also allowed me to believe that her child was mine throughout the entire pregnancy and birth process. She had accepted my proposal, planned our wedding, and let me experience the joy of believing I was becoming a father, all while knowing that another man was the baby's biological parent. I confronted Stephanie with the DNA test results immediately, presenting her with the official documentation that proved Christopher was not my biological child. Her reaction was a mixture of shock, panic, and desperate attempts to explain or minimize what the results revealed about her deception. She initially tried to suggest that the test results might be wrong, that medical errors were possible, or that there might be some other explanation for the unexpected findings. But when I pressed her about the implications of the DNA evidence, she finally admitted that she had been intimate with someone else during the time when Christopher would have been conceived. I told Stephanie that she needed to leave my house immediately, that our engagement was over, and that I couldn't continue any kind of relationship with someone who had deceived me so completely about something so fundamental. The trust that had been the foundation of our partnership had been irreparably destroyed, and there was no way to move forward together after such a massive betrayal. Stephanie's departure from my house was difficult and emotional, with her alternating between apologies, explanations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness and another chance. She packed her belongings while I tried to process the magnitude of what had happened and figure out how to rebuild my life after losing both the woman I loved and the child I had believed was mine. The news of our engagement cancellation spread quickly through our social circle, as these things inevitably do when a wedding that people have been anticipating suddenly gets called off. Most of our friends and family members were shocked by the sudden end of what had appeared to be a stable, happy relationship, and many of them reached out to offer support and ask what had happened. I kept the details of the situation private, simply explaining that we had discovered we weren't compatible for marriage, and that we had decided to end our engagement before making a bigger mistake. I wasn't ready to discuss the DNA test results or Stephanie's infidelity with friends and family, preferring to process the situation privately rather than turning it into public drama. But several weeks after Stephanie had moved out and I was beginning to adjust to living alone again, I received a message that provided additional context about what had happened and how long the deception had been going on. The message came from Jessica, who had been a mutual friend of both Stephanie and me, but had grown closer to Stephanie over the years. Jessica and Stephanie had been friends and had maintained their friendship for years, though I had noticed that their relationship had become more distant recently for reasons I hadn't understood. In her message, Jessica told me that she had been aware of Stephanie's ongoing contact with her ex-boyfriend throughout our relationship and had repeatedly advised her to make a choice between us rather than trying to maintain relationships with both men simultaneously. According to Jessica, she had warned Stephanie that her deception would eventually be discovered and that she was being unfair to everyone involved. Jessica praised me for being smart enough to figure out what was really happening, apparently assuming that I had discovered Stephanie's deception through careful investigation rather than through a routine DNA test that had revealed information I hadn't been specifically looking for. She explained that she had told Stephanie multiple times to end things with one of the men in her life, arguing that trying to keep both relationships going was dishonest and unsustainable. But according to Jessica, Stephanie had responded to this advice by quarreling with her and defending her right to keep her options open until she was ready to make a final decision. This information provided important context about the timeline and scope of Stephanie's deception. Rather than a single instance of infidelity during our relationship, it appeared that she had been maintaining some level of connection with her ex-boyfriend for much longer, possibly throughout our entire time together. Jessica's message also explained why their friendship had become strained recently. Jessica had apparently grown tired of watching Stephanie deceive me and had distanced herself from the situation rather than continue to be complicit in the deception or risk further conflict with Stephanie about her choices. While I appreciated Jessica reaching out to provide this information, I wasn't entirely sure how much of her account I could trust. People's memories of conversations and conflicts can be unreliable, especially when they're trying to justify their own behavior or position themselves favorably after a situation has exploded. But whether Jessica's version of events was completely accurate or not, the fundamental reality remained the same. Stephanie had deceived me about Christopher's paternity and had apparently been maintaining some kind of relationship with her ex-boyfriend while building a life with me. The additional information Jessica provided did help me understand that Stephanie's deception had been more systematic and long-term than I had initially realized. Rather than a momentary lapse in judgment or a brief period of uncertainty, it appeared that she had been deliberately managing multiple relationships for an extended period while allowing me to believe I was her only romantic partner. This revelation made me feel somewhat vindicated in my decision to end our relationship immediately rather than trying to work through the betrayal with counseling or other reconciliation efforts. Someone who was capable of maintaining such elaborate deception for such an extended period wasn't someone who could be trusted to be honest in the future, regardless of their promises or apparent remorse. In the months that followed, Stephanie made numerous attempts to reconnect with me and convince me to give our relationship another chance. She would call, send letters, and occasionally show up at my house trying to discuss what had happened and explore possibilities for reconciliation. Her efforts to get back into my life were persistent and emotionally manipulative, alternating between appeals to our shared history, promises of complete honesty in the future, and attempts to minimize the significance of what she had done. She would argue that Christopher was still the same child regardless of his biological parentage, and that we could build a family together based on love rather than genetics. But I was sure that our relationship wasn't coming back, regardless of how persistent her efforts were or how convincing her promises might sound. The foundation of trust that had supported our partnership for 5 years had been completely destroyed, and I couldn't imagine a way to rebuild it after learning the extent of her deception. The experience of discovering Stephanie's betrayal and ending our relationship taught me valuable lessons about the importance of honesty and transparency in intimate partnerships. It also showed me how people can compartmentalize their emotions and maintain elaborate deceptions while appearing to be completely committed to their primary relationship. Looking back on our years together, I can see warning signs that I chose to ignore or rationalize away. Stephanie's occasional defensiveness when I asked about certain aspects of her social life, and her reluctance to fully integrate our lives in certain ways, might have been indicators of the secret relationship she was maintaining. But ultimately, I realized that my failure to detect her deception wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy as a partner or my naivety about relationships. Someone who is determined to maintain multiple relationships while appearing committed to one can be incredibly skilled at managing the logistics and emotional complexity required to keep such deceptions going. The DNA test that revealed Christopher wasn't my biological child had saved me from years of unknowingly raising another man's child while being married to someone who had never been fully committed to our relationship. While the discovery was devastating, it had also freed me from a situation that would have been built on lies and false pretenses. Today, I'm grateful that the truth was revealed when it was, even though the process was incredibly painful. The woman who had deceived me about something so fundamental had shown me that some betrayals are too extensive to forgive, and that some relationships are too damaged to salvage. The message from Jessica had provided additional context that confirmed the systematic nature of Stephanie's deception, but it hadn't changed my decision about ending our relationship. Whether the betrayal had lasted months or years, whether it had been primarily emotional or physical, the fundamental reality was that Stephanie had chosen to deceive me about the most important aspects of our life together. Christopher deserved to know his real father and to be raised by people who could be honest about his origins. Stephanie deserved to be with someone who could forgive her betrayal or who was comfortable with the kind of relationship flexibility she apparently needed. And I deserved to build a life with someone who was genuinely committed to honesty, loyalty, and the kind of partnership that doesn't require DNA tests to verify its foundations. The walkout after that DNA test wasn't just leaving a relationship. It was walking away from a life built on lies and toward the possibility of something authentic and real. Sometimes the truth is devastating, but it's always better than living a beautiful lie that will eventually crumble under the weight of its own deception.